Welcome to Serious Talk. I'm your host, Greg Banks. Today, we have Gavin Franklin, the head of our custom development department here at Sirius, along with Tim Harting, our chief operating officer. Gavin lives in the custom development world, and while we have discussed AI thoroughly, we've not discussed the impact it has had and will have on the development world. This is a really exciting episode, so let's jump right in. Welcome to the show. Today, we've got Tim Harting back on the mic, and joining us for the first time, Gavin Franklin. Welcome, Gavin. Great to have you here today.
Yeah, nice to be here. Super excited.
Gavin lives in the custom development world, which can often look a little different than the declarative world many of us live in. Today, we're going into his realm. We're going to talk about what effects AI has had on development. So catch us up, Gavin. What impact have you seen over the last several months, maybe a year, and what has that meant for you and your team?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge impact. I think most people across the board in dev space are now believers, or at least they recognize that AI has been having a big impact on their work. Specifically, in development, in the Salesforce world, we jump around to a few different things, whether it be Apex, whether it be Lightning Web Components. And one thing that we've seen is whenever it involves code, it has been really, really solid at helping us get a solid foundation, 75% of the way done. It does a really good job with proof of concepts, particularly with Lightning Web Components. So we've been able to create visualizations of what we want to create for clients, pretty quickly, even in the pre-sale cycle. So that has been a pretty major thing. And just the amount of code that we've been able to produce has been very large. One of the downsides that we do see, though, right now is just where the scalability of AI has been problematic for a lot of platforms that are super declarative. So Salesforce is a good example of this, but we work a lot with integrations as well. So specifically talking about Boomi or MuleSoft. So we've had some issues really having AI have an impact in those areas.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, it's been interesting. I think that's one of the biggest kind of shifts we've seen in the last 6 months, because I think when we were in the spring and kind of surveying across different groups of people, when you were talking to consultants versus business users versus sales reps versus engineers or developers, kind of the developers were almost like you'd expect them to be the earliest adopters of AI. And in many cases that, in a lot of surveys that have been published over the last, over that time period in the spring, they were some of the last holdouts. But I think that's been just a really big shift with some of the tools that have come out even over the spring and then into the summer with Claude Code and Codex. You've now seen this really big wave of adoption by development teams, and in some of the biggest immediate ROI impacts for businesses have been specifically in the space of AI development. And I think, Gavin, what have you seen with the team in terms of specific use cases that have really stood out where we've been able to maybe see some of the biggest, productivity gains from your development team?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big areas that we've had pretty major impact on is education. So if we go and tackle a new system, maybe we haven't integrated with it, or even people learning MuleSoft for the first time, they've been jumping in and just researching, MuleSoft, really being able to take XML from flows and saying, what in the world is this doing? That's been a pretty big space.
So debugging or just understanding the code base before you even jump in and work with it?
100%. I mean, we do that pretty much across the board now. If I get any code that I have to work on that's pre-existing, first thing I'm going to do is copy and paste as much into it. Or sit there with an agentic, IDE to be able to say what's going on in this org. I think the biggest impact we've seen has been with Lightning Web Components.
Do you want to just describe for the listeners here too, what is a Lightning Web Component? I know we know that really in the Salesforce space, but
yeah. So a Lightning Web Component is essentially a visual layer on top of your Salesforce database that allows you to customize interaction with the users. It's really just HTML and CSS at the back end and JavaScript, but it's,
so front end development.
Yeah, 100%. And if you talk to a lot of developers, it's kind of funny. It's every time I do interviews, it's what's your least favorite kind of development? It's always front end development. It's one or the other. And most of the time when you work with, back end developers, front end developing is just the worst. So I'm not surprised that we see a lot of positive impact in the Lightning Web Component space and front-end development, because every single developer is anytime I have to touch CSS, I go to AI first, because it produces stuff that takes years for somebody in front-end development to be able to, produce at a quick speed without doing a lot of research.
I think it helps just like bridge this big gap that's always existed between many like business teams and technical teams too, because, you'd always have to, and still do, right? Have to really define your requirements, do a design. But the gap between like when you're talking with a business about or an organization about what they want to do versus, and then fast forward, weeks or months forward to the time where you finally get something visual in front of them to give feedback on, there's been a massive lag. And so being able to do this front end development faster too, I think, one of the areas we've seen as a business, just proofs of concepts, and like being able to just churn out a proof of concept, front end really, really fast to kind of give something that like the business and the technical team can both look at together, feel, touch, play around with a little bit, to maybe bridge the communication gaps between both sides of the aisle, and really kind of hone in on a well-designed solution faster, right? So like I think their gains are not just in like the tool and the development itself, but also in how it really fosters, better communication, which is usually, I think, one of the number one inefficient or productivity killing pieces of many technical projects. It's the communication gaps in the telephone game.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's a good call out too. When it comes to something like front end development, if you go through, education within the computer science realm or just programming realm, you realize that programming is really taking requirements and breaking them down into really simplistic parts that a computer you can codify. But with front end development and AI, it's really just, this is what I want to see, which is a lot easier to explain than than the skill set of taking down a problem into its own individual parts. So yeah, I think we see a lot of gains in POCs, front end development in particular.
How about just changes in terms of, and I think this is probably a work in progress for almost every development team right now, and everybody's trying to adapt to it. But like, what needs to change from a developer's mindset and standpoint with the new tools that they have access to as well? Like, do the same kind of CI/CD DevOps processes work? Does the same kind of developer mindset work, or does that kind of have to shift a little bit with these newer tools to adapt to it?
A lot of it just depends on the direction that the company's going in. So I will say that a big shift in mindset is the fear. I think there's still a lot of fear behind AI, not just with, taking jobs, but also with the concept of, like, you've heard AI slop, like generating poor code. And one of the things that, I see a lot of developers are scared of is this idea that the org that they're working in or whatever process they're working on is kind of like theirs to have and maintain. And what AI is doing is allowing people without development skill sets to have impacts in that area. And I think they're worried that they're going to be a negative impact. They're going to generate things and produce things that aren't up to the quality that they have. So I would almost argue that things like DevOps in nature are going to be more and more important, and the mind space the developer needs to change. I always say this from the developer point of view, is like we really aren't developers in our space. We're consultants with a developer skill set. And I think that needs to be adopted across the board from development, not just with Salesforce, not just with consulting. Developers, in a sense, need to start leveling up the mentality of, how do I now lead development within the company and promote best practices and get myself into more of a code control mindset.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely key, because, I mean, there's no denying that, an agentic powered IDE and agentic powered like toolkit for a developer is, has the potential to be massively more productive, but it also has the same potential to be massively more destructive. So you've got to have the right controls. It puts an increased focus on your DevOps process, your QA process, your code review process. But I think that's where like the focus really needs to be, because I think if done right, there's just a ton of gains to be had right now with the technology where it even stands today. And I think dev teams are just starting to figure that out. And I think we'll see, like, I think a lot of the, frameworks that we have for DevOps and CI/CD, we're probably going to turn more into like agentic coding frameworks as well. So be interesting to see. So Salesforce has just recently announced AgentForce Vibes, or the Vibe Cody agent, as they call it sometimes as well. And so it's interesting seeing Salesforce now kind of entering into the AI-powered coding space. And so what Salesforce, if we go on to kind of the Salesforce developers website, they're touting capabilities around context-aware planning mode to help you understand your Salesforce org much, much faster. Like we've already talked about, that we can do with other coding tools too, but agentic code generation around front end as well as back end is what they say. So Apex, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, model context protocol support, so you can hook in other tools with it. Test case generation, code analysis, agentic bug resolution, and then natural language, DevOps, and app deployment. So pretty interesting, like Salesforce, kind of wading full in on the agentic development space. This is available both in an IDE via Code Fork. So whether you're using Cursor or Windsurf, but also available within Salesforce as well. So what are your thoughts on the AgentForce Vibe so far? I know it's a newer product. What's been the initial reactions that you've seen from the team?
Yeah, so let's start real quick with what it is. So it was previously, so they actually had a cloud-based IDE. It was basically a Visual Studio Code wrapper available in Salesforce, but it was through a managed package. So, you had to go in as an admin, download the managed package, and then you were able to launch it. They have rebranded that into AgentForce Vibes and then put in an AI agent powered by ChatGPT. And I will say they do, like you said, they do offer the two versions. They do have the cloud-based. You can bring it in locally. It doesn't make a lot of sense to bring it in locally from everything that I've seen. You have much more powerful agents in Codex and Claude to be able to leverage in your local machines to, really amplify your ability to develop. And there's also a lot of limitations to the Vibe Cody local instance as far as how often you can use it for free. The cloud-based version, though, is really interesting because it launches straight from your Salesforce org, just like a dev console. So when you talk about MCP server support, the powerful thing is it's automatically connected to your Salesforce org. So it has context awareness of all of your, not only metadata, but your data as well. And one of the things I will say is this is nothing new, or at least over the last few months. We've had Salesforce MCP support that you can do locally. What I see this as is another push in the direction where Salesforce is saying we can get admins, non-technical, non-developers into a space to write code, to be able to take complex requirements and work with it agentically in the cloud, because it's removing that barrier of having to set up a local environment and maintain, maintaining the command line interface for SFDX and various other tools that you need, like VS Code and your agents. It removes that barrier of entry for people who are coming into the programming space, or maybe you're still in the admin space looking to have impact in that area.
Yeah, and I think it's just it's creating this really interesting kind of change or pivot from the last, when I'm talking specifically in the Salesforce space, we've seen this really big pivot, I think, for the last 6-7 years or so, where everything's been moving to more click, not code, declarative tool. I think, since I've been implementing and delivering Salesforce solutions for customers, I think the amount of custom development that we have to do for our customers has decreased almost 75% from 2019 to 2024. And then what we're seeing now, though, is this year is now the barrier to entry to do, not just for non-developers but developers, the cost and time to do custom development is going down so much that now we're doing more solutions for customers with code that provides even more flexibility potentially than a lot of the clicks not code configurable features like Salesforce Flow. And now maybe there's a pivot going back more towards code. So what do you think if you were giving somebody advice I'm doing Salesforce, where should I focus? Should I focus on configuration, declarative, or should I focus on code? I know that's an unfair question because it's not really an either or, but what would you say to that?
I would definitely say focusing on code is great for multiple reasons. One, focusing on code in Salesforce is nice because it's transferable. From a I guess career standpoint, you have a lot of flexibility if you have a code foundation, even started in Salesforce, because you're able to touch on front end development. You're able to touch on a Java-like language. That's I would say going in that direction is still really versatile. But I agree with you 100% that I think even from the verbiage of Salesforce, they're swinging more towards like agentic friendly / code friendly in their verbiage. Where if you look back a year ago, it was clicks not code. You don't have to touch it at all. I don't understand, or I don't see a future where Salesforce develops an AI agent specifically tooled to help you build flows. And if it is, it's just going to be building flow metadata. And it'll just do it in a way that displays it in a UI. Because the real problem that I think Salesforce and a lot of declarative platforms have backed themselves into a corner with is it really worth investing all of this time and energy into making our declarative solutions more flexible, or do we just let AI, bots run with creating code that is infinitely flexible on our platform because it's done a lot faster? The problem and barrier to entry for that for the past 10 years has been the cost of developers, the cost of implementation. And if you're able to generate 5 times more, then that cost starts to go down.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's really interesting. Like, what is the value proposition then of, Salesforce Flow? Like, what do declarative automation solutions, what are they supposed to provide? Well, they're supposed to make things simpler, cheaper, and faster to implement. I think it's a double-edged sword a little bit because I think it's not just Salesforce Flow, but there's a lot of other declarative tools out there on any platform. They get more and more complex. They add more components to the point where they're almost as flexible as regular code. But then you basically almost have to learn your own language of Salesforce Flow just to be able to do Salesforce Flow really well. Right? So it's like, well, why didn't I just go and learn, JavaScript or learn Python right out of the gate? And then I could have more flexibility. And now code's getting faster and cheaper to implement. So I think the utility, again, I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit, but I do think a general trend is the utility of like declarative automation tools is really going to take a big hit. And I think a lot of that's going to shift to like learning agentic coding frameworks that helps you implement high quality code faster in a lot of different use cases, but we'll just have to see where it goes. But any thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I mean, I think it's evident too in what Salesforce is focusing on and what platforms are focusing on. I think we're starting to see a lot, like a weird shift or an increase in tools, developer tools, which is strange. Like look at Salesforce and it's like, why would they ever invest in developer tools? They're looking at it now and saying, well, it's worth it because we can do a lot with developer tools that we weren't able to do 3 years ago. So I do think they see value in that space. I'm interested really too in where they go with Vibe Cody and where they go with the Salesforce platform in general. A lot of my thoughts with agentic coding, the biggest problem that we have today, and the biggest problem that developers have that they try to overcome is context, whether it be context in the data you're working with, context in the metadata you're working with. Now that you have that, really it's context in what you're attempting to build, what you're working on. So when I think about my agentic platform, if I'm working with Claude, one thing that I think is incredibly valuable, if I can get it context aware of my metadata in Salesforce, context aware of my data. I also want a context aware of my user stories. Try to build this. I do think that's the step, that's the direction that I see a lot of this heading. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see some sort of, maybe not necessarily a full-fledged PM tool, but some sort of capability in Salesforce to document out, what it is you're trying to build, maybe even agent-led, and to a sense that Vibe Cody can understand and try to build.
Yeah. I mean, it's either you try to make the application itself be able to do it, or you continue to open it up more and more to be able to hook, leverage MCP, leverage things like, just how it can work within as an MCP itself with Claude or Codex or whatever to then provide, get context to the right tool. So it'll be interesting whether they try to open it up so then you can bring more context to it through hooking it up with other systems, or try to provide the context within the application itself. Yeah, I mean, we've kind of mentioned three of the key terms we've seen come out so far on coding with AI. You've got vibe coding, right, on one side, which is kind of what we've talked about. Like it's kind of proven like we don't want to see happening too much outside of maybe for proofs of concepts, where it's like I might be somebody with low technical skill sets and I'm using coding tools to maybe just come up with an idea. Like that only gets you so far. You can't get to production ready. So it has its uses, right? But like ultimately that's not going to lead to enterprise grade code. Then we've got agentic coding that we've talked about. So that's using an agent powered having agentic power within your IDE to help you develop and iterate and build the code itself. And you need a very structured framework and DevOps to do that well. And then you've got the third term we've talked about, context engineering. So how are we getting the right context to our agents, the right sets of data, the right information for it to be able to work with? If you can get the right context, your results are significantly better. A lot of times where people are hitting the limits with agentic coding, from what I've seen, there are examples of where, okay, you're not getting enough context or the right context to it, rather than the tool itself being the problem. So it'll be interesting to see how they develop that over time. So, I mean, we've did some research ourselves, and we've talked to some customers as well, and other people across the space. And if you go look on Reddit, what are people's reactions to vibe coding so far? I think a lot of it's still in like the too early to tell phase. I think people are playing around with it a little bit. Too early to tell whether it's going to provide the value or not. But I think the other big piece of feedback too is just lack of clarity again on pricing too, which seems to be kind of the main thing that's tripping people up with a lot of new Salesforce tools over the last couple of years. Is okay, this is great, understand the concept, but be clear to me on what it's going to cost. Is that kind of what you've seen as well? And kind of what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, we've struggled to just pour through the documentation ourselves to understand what it's going to cost for usage. And of course, like when you have Salesforce going back, it just had Dreamforce. And one of the outcomes of that is we have no idea what's included in anything anymore. Everything is AgentForce. So there's a lot of relabeling. So definitely it's been a struggle across the community for almost every product that's being released, particularly within AI. Salesforce is kind of magnifies the problem, I feel like, at times.
Right.
As far as what does all this cost us? You see like the token, cost structure pretty frequently. And it seems like that is somewhat tied into agent vibe coding, but it is also tied into your regular licensing. So you get a certain amount of usage.
Yeah, I think it's like 50 prompts per day or something like that. It's like 50 prompts, and then of using any of the selected LLMs that you can within the tool. And then after that, you can use more prompts, but it's with the Salesforce's XGen LLM language, which I haven't really seen where that lands on benchmarks or what the quality is of that. Haven't seen a lot of feedback on that yet, so that's something we'd have to certainly dig into. But yeah, so what do you think? What do you think in terms of like what does all this mean for where Salesforce is going moving forward? I've heard a lot of different opinions on this in terms of is Salesforce trying to enable development of the Salesforce platform for end user companies where non-technical people can do it? Are they going to try to develop themselves? What does this mean for partners? Any general thoughts there in terms of like where Salesforce is going next with AI coding tools?
Well, I'm an optimist when it comes to these things. I'll say that what I think this means for Salesforce is as the development capability on the platform continues to expand, products make less sense to me. Like you can kind of see that there's a little bit of an abandonment at times on products from the Salesforce side. And what I mean by that is you have your sales cloud, you've got your service cloud, you have your RLib, you've got your field service. But in reality, if you look at the core of Salesforce, Salesforce is an object-oriented database with a pretty robust programming language on top of that that's built off of Java, and it's cloud-based. So in my mind, I see Salesforce making more plays in the ERP space, making more plays across systems, like kind of monopolizing the cloud structure and saying, we can do whatever you want, and it doesn't cost as much as it does anymore. And I do see them making a play to say, hey, we can do this without needing developers. But I don't think that's necessarily doom and gloom for the consultancy space. I think what that means is we have more opportunity to get, unique with the way that we deliver and what we can deliver on. We already see us developing POCs. I can't tell you how many times in this last year I've looked at a project, put out a POC, estimated a project that 3 years ago would have been like, we shouldn't do this. It's just easier now. It just opens up this space for more stuff to do. So I think it just allows consulting firms to get, more versatile with what they can deliver on. And ultimately just opens up the capabilities for Salesforce to do more than just be a CRM, potentially.
Yeah, I would agree. They've created a lot of niche products, but then like the maturity of those niche products, whether it's like the different industries cloud, you have like health cloud and life sciences cloud, then you have media cloud, you've got, you name it, right? Salesforce blockchain, like all these different cloud things. Sounds like what you're saying though is like focus on the platform piece, that like focus on it being the best bucket of Legos, right? That you can do and like implement very quickly rather than focus on kind of a niche end product. Focus on how it can be used to develop the fastest with it to do anything that a business wants. And I would agree with that. I think also like it's just got to be the same way services companies and development companies are going to be expect to do things faster and cheaper because of agentic coding. I think for companies that are looking for stuff out of Salesforce platform and other major platforms, it's like, okay, great. But if I'm going to use this to cut my development costs, how is it going to be cheaper or faster for me? Salesforce, so to do that, you have to have very straightforward pricing, and you've got to get the pricing aligned with the value that it delivers. And so I think that's another big thing that hopefully we see moving forward. So we'll just see where it goes. But yeah, great conversation. So a lot more to unpack in future episodes for sure with these.
No doubt. I feel like we kicked open the door to a warehouse full of topics today. So yeah, Gavin, you and I have had some off-cuff conversations over the years. I think there's another layer on this to think about, and what typically would inhibit people from going down the custom development route is not just the cost to build it, but the cost of ownership. Back in the day, you got a CD, you installed it, what you got was what you got, and it never got better. And I think a lot of people did custom dev programs outside of Salesforce back that way. The same way was you install it and you can never really update it because, man, whoever wrote it, if they're not in staff, they may not be there anymore. How many times have we run into that where somebody wrote something, that person is no longer available, we need to figure it out. So I think to end kind of where you started, the cost of ownership just went down dramatically. You said when you get introduced to a new client, and you're being asked to support their custom dev, one of the first things you do is let this tool accelerate your onboarding to understanding that, making it easier for you to get in and start running with it. This can do the same thing, whether we built it or anybody else built it. What this allows you to do is venture a little further out on those branches that felt dangerous, even a year ago. Now you open the doors. I mean, I think one of the things in 15 years of me being around this, people always complained about in Salesforce was just kind of bland, right? Black text, white screens, dynamic page layouts were out there for a long time. Like it didn't have some of the basic reactional things that software had 25 years ago. But now they've opened that, and this really kicks that door open to not even branding, but really just hone something in on what a client really wants and makes it more intuitive to your users. If the users don't know how to use it, the value is going to be limited right out of the gate. And this really kicks that open. So, man, I know we're going to go a lot of different places in future episodes, but great to have you here, Gavin. Great to hear your side of the world. I mean, this is arguably different than what happens on the declarative side. And this is a broad new frontier that we'll delve into in more future episodes. But thanks for having you both here today. Really enjoyed this conversation. Look forward to some feedback we can get on it. Thanks a lot, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks.
That's it for today's episode. Special thanks to Gavin and Tim for joining us today. AI news continues to dominate the landscape, but certainly this one sheds an entirely new light on how AI is changing things, not only for our customers, but for developers too. We'd love to have you back next time as we dive deeper into the world of tech consulting and spotlight the latest news shaping the Salesforce ecosystem. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. Got questions or ideas for future episodes? Drop us a line at serioustalk@serioussolutions.com. You'll find the address in the show notes. See you next time.